Hi everyone, it's Anastaci Pacella from the Core July. I'm here today with Molly Lambourn, who is an artist who participated in our summer residency in Joy. So Molly's talking to us all the way from the UK, where she's studying at the University of Creative Arts in Canterbury, and she's working on her Masters of Fine Arts. Molly, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. Um, so my first question that I wanted to ask you about is what drew you to the residency in Joy? Like, why did you want to apply for that?
I think the idea of a residency in joy, the concept of joy is just something that artists don't look at. I think artists have a lot of pressure to be very serious. And with lockdown at the time, so the UK was all in lockdown and it was very isolating time. And the thought of focusing on something quite positive just seemed really sort of tempting, and also just very different from my usual practice. So it seemed like a really good opportunity to sort of push myself. And also, it was a gallery in Massachusetts. So I just love the idea of meeting lots of people internationally. It just seems so exciting.
Oh, thanks. So, right, your work, you have these very detailed, dark but still whimsical drawings. When I was looking at them when you first applied, I was thinking a lot about the kinds of illustrations you might find in like an edition of Alice in Wonderland. So, what approach did you take towards researching or making art around joy, and how did that impact the style of art you were making?
I think for me, a lot of my art is, people see a very ornate finished product, but for me, a lot of it is about the process. So, in terms of joy, for me, it was the joy of making. It was really just indulging in the process and enjoying that, and actually just being grateful to be able to make art. I think almost sadly, in today's world, making art, indulging in art, researching art, that's a joy, that's a pleasure, that's something we can indulge in. So even just gratitude towards the actual process, that was something I took away from it. Um, in terms of researching, also, I guess for me, I really indulged in sort of trying to use more color. A lot of my work before that point was black and white, and while I had worked in color, I'd almost lost the confidence to do that. So I read Chromophobia, and I learned about using color with purpose, and I made a sort of pastel version of my usual work, and just played around with quite girly colors and just tried a few different things I wouldn't have normally done, and just thought about how those colors affected me emotionally as well.
Yeah, that's really great. So, Chromophobia is this book by David Batchelor. If you haven't read it before, it's really interesting. He analyzes the way that different writers use color for emotion and how it affects sort of our mental state, or how it's viewed culturally. Um, so when we think of like minimalist art and like this stone cold, very limited color palette, and how that's almost puritanical is how he writes about it, and really oppressive. And then other writers and artists use it in this really indulgent way, and it can be sometimes interpreted as like I don't know, like a fall to chaos, right? So his perspective on it was very, very interesting to me. What did you find with your work?
It just got me thinking about a book I later read, kind of related to chromophobia. It's called Radical Decadence, and it's about sort of unashamedly using detail and beautiful things, because something I felt before the residency was often, is my work too pretty to be meaningful? And it's actually something I'm researching at the moment. But there's no shame in indulging or drawing very beautiful things, and that doesn't mean the work suddenly just lacks depth because we're drawing something enjoyable. I think there is a lot of pressure for artists to be very minimal and very sort of brutal with their work, and you don't have to be to have impact, I think. um yeah.
Oh man, that's such a real struggle, especially as female artists. I feel like we often have to like prove that there's something going on in our heads, and like if so making something beautiful, it's like, oh, it actually makes me a little bit too upset to talk about intelligently.
Yeah,
But that's, I mean, that's very real, going back to like Adolf Loos's horrible, horrible essay, Crime and Punishment, and how, or
yeah, yeah,
ornamentation and crime. Um, uh, and the way he talks about literally everyone in this horrible way, that if it has ornaments on it or decoration, is, how does he describe it? That essentially that anything decorative is a sign of low intelligence, right? Um,
yeah. I think it was kind of like we've moved beyond an age where we need to be doing that. Um, but for me, it feels, in a way, it's sort of a reclaiming things that have been used to oppress women, like flowers and even the female body, by using it in a way that's a protest back against it, and that's quite exciting.
yeah,
So these beautiful symbols, they don't. And actually, for me, one thing I've been researching is beauty is such a loaded word, and beauty isn't at all a positive thing. In a way, we've been taught to use it, on Instagram. It's the same as saying, oh, that's great, that's beautiful. And it's sort of lost its meaning. But actually, beauty for me is this really loaded term full of trauma, for the oppression of women. It's to me, it's something that's got a lot of pain in it, actually.
that's interesting. So by making these detailed works, you're and these very ornamental, beautiful works, you're working through that, some of that trauma, and
Mm.
processing it, and also, it's meditative for you to create, why don't to create these detailed drawings, is it not?
Absolutely. I mean, the process, as I said, is so important for me. It's almost, I guess, it is therapeutic in a way, and it helps you get through all kinds of moments in your life, even just, it's not always entirely negative, but sometimes life's just boring. And I've always described drawing as this sort of companion that guides me through every day and every moment. So it's a representation of all kinds of emotions.
I think this might be a good time to show people what we're talking about.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to share my screen, and we'll take a look at some of um, Molly's drawings. So the first couple images are in progress. If I actually get zip back to where they're supposed to be, here we go. So these first two images are in progress shots. We're looking at two probably female women, and we can see that their hair is starting to be filled in with some very ornate floral designs. And as of right now, their faces are somewhat blank. What do you want to tell us about, how do you go about um, filling these in?
So I was this is actually a commission for, it's called Power of Women. It's a Kent Arts Festival, and it's a very sort of inclusive organisation for Women's Week. And there's an exhibition called Women in Protest. So this piece is for that. And actually, this was initially based on a documentary I just watched about Greenham women. So it was this group of women that lived together in protest of nuclear war. And they lived in this very anti-linear kind of campsite, and they were continually peacefully protesting. And I wanted to create something that wasn't sort of overtly about it, but really represented those values. So for me, I've got two women here. They'll be kneeling, and what they're holding is this peacock. And for me, the peacock is very much a symbol, actually, I guess, of patriarchy, because it's kind of the peacock is a symbol of masculinity. Obviously, the pretty peacocks that people love, they are masculine figures. And I like this idea of him almost holding it and accepting it, but there's something sort of stoic about them, and I'm still working it out how it will look, but it's very much this sort of idea of sisterhood and that burden we carry that's almost passed down. And I guess for me, what was shocking about this documentary, and I always find this when I did history before I did art, and you watch documentaries of women from the 70s, it doesn't matter where it is in the world, but the issues they talk about are still things that women feel and go through today. And it almost breaks my heart. So that's how it feels. It feels like this peacock is being passed between us over the generations, and we're still working through a lot of the same ideas and a lot of the same issues of feminism. So that's where this drawing's sort of going, but it's still got the characteristics of my work, which is the drawing. And the drawing is so important because it is the labor as well. It's and women have a lot of labor that just goes unnoticed and unrecognized. And I think there's always that sort of feminist commentary within the work.
Wow, that's so full and so rich and thoughtful. And I think that, sometimes that's why I love talking to artists, to get to know about what they're thinking about, because there's often so much meaning that we as the viewers maybe don't know about.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I want to jump to this image that you made during the residency in Joy. You were working on this one. And actually, there's quite a lot of similarity between this image and the one that you're working on now.
It's very much this formed the visual style for the new piece. This piece has had really nice feedback, and it's kind of got this Art Nouveau style to it. Mm-hmm. I really enjoy the style. So I guess you could call this new piece a bit of a sequel to it, which was partly why I included it. I made this during the residency, and for me, it's sort of this idea of duality. And I'm interested in duality. Sort of artists like Frida Kahlo, they've used this idea of the two parts to our identity. And I think for me, it was in lockdown. It was kind of, a literal sort of highs and lows. This idea that sometimes we're blooming and we feel like we're really progressing, and other times we just feel shriveled and a bit, just a bit deflated, I guess. It's definitely, this one is for me a definite comment on some very sort of personal experiences of lockdown and mental health. This has just come out of a gallery, and I just picked it up today, so I'm quite happy to have it back home with me. But yeah, I do. I'm very fond of this piece, actually. It's nice when you have a piece and afterwards you just feel very connected with it, actually. But yeah. But I use a lot of flowers as well, and nature, because for me, literature does come into my work a lot. So I think a lot about Robert Frost and this idea of the woods and nature as this source of knowledge and restoration. So I think as well, it's kind of, there's this certain nurturing element. It's very contemplative. It's very thoughtful, my work. I think there's a lot going on there, and the flowers, again, it's one of these things that seem quite decorative and needless, but actually there's something obsessive about drawing them, and it's imagining yourself in these sort of spaces and becoming immersed within it and almost escaping, I think.
Yeah. I can only, when I'm up against a painting, especially these works are fairly large, and when you're working on something big and detailed and you're like really right in it, right, that experience as the artist in that process, which I know is important to you, and then sometimes you have to like step back from it and see like, oh wow, like this is what the whole thing is. This is what I'm creating. Can you tell us more about this mask? I see it in some of your more recent figurative work has the females are wearing these masks.
Yeah, I think I haven't quite figured out why I continually draw the mask. I think it's something to do, feeling it's something to do with insecurity. There's obviously a hiding, and again, within my work, there's the theme of the beautiful surface and the slightly, maybe more unpleasant reality. So there's definitely, I think, a pressure in this world to put a face on, whether that be literal makeup or, coming across very confident on days where you're not. This whole concept of fake it till you make it, right? And I think, yeah, I think that just comes through in a lot of my work is very much, we live in a world of surfaces and it's very hard to get underneath what's going on there. So I think the mask comes in partly because of that.
And then it's a beautiful visual element as well, which, in your research, you're advocating for that visual element of how it has its own sort of power. This work is so gorgeous, and the more I look at it, the more I can see other faces and figures within their features, and within their hair. And I'm half wondering how much of those are more faces that you've added in intentionally, and half of it is my brain just putting together this in the design, the way our brains work, and we're wired to find more faces and for everything.
That's so fascinating, because I haven't actually added in any extra faces, but I might have to go and look at it later and see if I can see extra. Yeah, it's not deliberate, but I think that's the thing with the type of work I do. It's so sort of detailed that there could be inadvertent things that it does to our brains. I don't know if you've ever seen Bridget Riley's work, and it's very different to mine, but it's very all about patterns, so lots of dots. But if you're in the gallery looking at it, and you sort of hallucinate a bit, and I think that's the point of it. It's amazing effect though, so it's quite cool I've achieved that.
I'm gonna have to. I wrote her name down. I'll have to look at it after we get off this call.
Yeah, it's very different to mine, but I think you'll enjoy it. Yeah.
And then I just want to show everyone this last piece that you sent me. This is more like the work that you applied with.
Yeah. Yeah, this is called Influx. This took over 60 hours to make. So this is all the work here is very big work. I do like to work with scale. And again, I guess it's, for me, it's this idea of being in free fall. There's this writer called Hito Sterol, and in their work they sort of discuss this feeling of being, like falling, but is falling a bad thing? And with the Residency and Joy, I was very interested in this, because it could be considered a piece of, it's definitely a piece about uncertainty. For me, the uncertainty of being in my 20s, just starting out as an artist and not knowing what's going to happen, which is terrifying. But it's not necessarily a bad feeling to be uncomfortable. And I think that's what it is. It's this feeling of falling and being, it's deliberately, this style of work that I do is deliberately detailed and traumatic. It's meant to be relentless. Because it kind of reflects where my head is at sometimes, when you just feel so cluttered and you can't think. It's meant to be that kind of claustrophobic kind of site.
That's a really interesting question of, is falling a bad thing, right? I think my initial response is, well, of course, like, you could get hurt, but then also you don't want to, there's like a sense of freedom and possibility when you're not grounded in something, to try something new. And we do learn so much from our failures and from our mistakes. When things go well, what have we learned in that moment?
Yeah, and I guess also it's what words do you add after it? You could say falling in love. That's not a bad thing.
That's
So
true.
there's so many elements to it. Yeah, it's an interesting thought, I think. But yeah, I think there's something good about feeling uncomfortable. So I do view this as more as a positive piece,
Hmm.
but absolutely it could be taken the other way. And I think that that very much depends. Again, I think with a lot of art, it's the viewer, and the viewer almost will always have their own perception and emotional connection with a piece of work. And that's something you can never sort of control. But I think that's a good thing. I think that's exciting.
Yeah.
Um, Especially as an artist, because you learn about other people and how they respond to your work as well. And I love that. I love, yeah, just so interesting.
Totally. All right. I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. And you've left me with so much to think about that I'm really I'm really like at a loss for words right now. But how have you incorporated joy into your artistic practice since leaving the residency? Has it stayed with you?
Absolutely. It's definitely a framework, not only for my artistic practice, but just how I live life. And that's just to have gratitude in everything that we do. And I'm just so grateful for being able to make art. That's, you know, that's a wonderful feeling. Um, and I think definitely it's given a different lens, especially with my, so I'm currently writing my dissertation, and it is about this idea of beauty and if it can meaningfully convey things like trauma. And actually, for me, I've learned that, you know, it's okay to be positive, it's okay to use beautiful images and beautiful things, and you can use that meaningfully. So it's almost giving me some sort of affirmation that I can be, you know, I can be positive. I don't have to be worried about continually being meaningful, but just know there is meaning, at the very least, in the process and the result. There is something meaningful in joy and in happy things, and that's okay. So yeah, it stuck with me, I think.
Yeah. One of my hopes is, or one of my thoughts about artistic production or creation is, as artists, we are culture creators, right? So there is so much in our world that needs rectifying in terms of, social justice. Every country, every community has its own systems of oppression that need to be fought against, and we have a lot to struggle with. Um, and so artists who are inclined to describe that and bring to light ways that we can improve as a society, that's awesome. And that's so valuable and important and necessary. And at least for me, I'm also trying to find a way through it. I worry that if we spend so much time describing the negative and creating dystopian, especially fiction work, creating dystopian universes, I worry that those are the models that we're showing into the world. And so
Yeah.
I think that it is important and valuable to show things that are positive and beautiful, to also show the alternatives and the way out, the other way that the world could be. So I would
And
argue that.
we have to learn how to survive as well. That's the big thing. You've got to, that was the biggest thing from the start of the residency was, um, of course we should protest, of course we should stand up for issues that matter, but we can't do that if we don't look after ourselves. And yeah, I think art should just much be about survival and restoration as much as it is about talking about these bigger issues.
Yeah, I totally, completely agree with you. Um, well, thank you so much for joining us. Oh, I want to make sure that people can find more of your work if they're um, so inclined. So you can, at the bottom of the screen, we have Molly's website, and then you can follow her on Instagram at Molly Lambourn. And you really, like, she's so active. So definitely give her a follow and check out her work. And I'm sure that if I was a professional YouTuber, I would have more that I would know to say, but I don't. So thank you. Hope that you can like and subscribe and follow The Cordial Eye as well. And have a great day. Thank you, Molly, so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.